Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I grew up in a small town in Alabama. A little bit after I graduated high school when I was 18, I started dating this guy in his early 20s from a nearby city. He was very handsome, tall, muscular male that we'll call Sean for this story. He told me on our first date that he used to be part of a very well-known gang in the United States. Sean explained that he'd only been a part of this gang in his younger years because he had grown up in a bad area and hadn't really had any other options. He also did have proof of being in the said gang, including being aware of gang signs associated with the gang and having tattoos about that gang. Which I did Google to see if the tattoos and gang signs were in fact associated with it. I know that there are some people who like to lie about being ex-gang members and the like for some reason just to seem cool. And Sean didn't seem like the type to lie about that too. I gave Sean the benefit of the doubt because he didn't really give me any bad vibes. I remember he was always a gentleman to me and treated me very well. So of course, I didn't really suspect anything about him. We dated for a few weeks before the night that I found out the truth about him. I was staying over at Sean's apartment one night and everything was seeming pretty normal. This was the first time that I'd ever stayed that night at his apartment, since I do tend to be a bit cautious. So, regardless of his background, it wouldn't have mattered. I just don't really like staying over at people's homes until I get to know them a bit more, and I do have at least a 3-date rule. And also, I'd been too busy before to really stay over at his place. So, that night when I was staying over, Sean's best friend was visiting for a bit, and that's when the red flags started to show up. It did seem weird to have a friend over when the girl you are seeing is staying over for the first time. And it was revealed to me in private that Sean's friend was another ex-gang member from a well-known gang that is the enemy to the gang that he was a part of. Of course, I can accept that people all have their backstories, but it was definitely just a weird thing to suddenly tell me out of the blue. Additionally, Sean had not even told me that his friend would be at the apartment that day in the first place. In an additional note, Sean's friend did corroborate that he and Sean were both ex-gang members. Then after Sean's friend had left, we were hanging out in his room, and this guy had a literal arsenal in his room. I'm not exaggerating when I say that he had enough weaponry to arm a small militia. This included things like grenades, bulletproof vest, and an AK-47 or a gun similar to it, to name a few of the weapons he had in his room. Needless to say, that was the second red flag of the day. That night we were in bed together. I can't remember what led him into revealing to me what he said in our conversation. He confessed to me that he was still a part of the gang that he had told me that he said that he was out now. So of course, I was immediately giving him this look like, "I'm sorry, what?" Then he proceeded to go on and tell me that he actually was a hitman for the gang, and while he hadn't been active as a hitman as of late, he would still accept hits if they were given to him. The entire time he said this, he just looked me dead in the eyes with the most deadpan casual look, no feeling in his eyes, and spoke like he was talking about the weather. It was extremely creepy, and I knew right then that this guy was a straight-up sociopath. I don't doubt that he was lying. I've met people who tried to get clout by lying about things like this, and he was definitely not one of those types. I did stay the rest of the night, and I then left the next morning and never talked to him again. I was definitely not going to keep dating someone like that. There's not really anything to the story after that. He never really tried to contact me too. I'm sure people will probably wonder why I didn't just leave right after he told me that he was a hitman. I didn't think that it was a good idea to react strongly and immediately storm out of the apartment. I also didn't actually feel like he was a danger to me personally, but he definitely had the vibe of someone who had killed people. The reason why I recognized that kind of vibe is another story. He was always very polite to me, but regardless, there was no way that I was going to keep dating him, no matter how hot he was. I want to tell you about a strange date that I went on a while back. I've always been a bit skeptical about online dating, but after hearing so many success stories from my friends, I thought, why not give it a try? So there I was, scrolling through different profiles, trying to find someone who caught my interest. And after chatting with a few people, I started talking to this guy named Tim. He seemed nice enough. He had a decent job, similar interests, just an ordinary guy looking to meet someone. We talked on the app for about a week, sharing the usual fun facts about ourselves. He liked hiking and photography, and we even shared our favorite author. There was nothing that set off any alarms to me. So when he asked to meet up for coffee, I thought, why not? We decided on a small cafe in the city, a cozy spot with good reviews. I remember arriving a few minutes earlier, feeling that mix of excitement and nerves that you get before meeting someone new. I deliberately chosen a public place because it felt safer to me, given that this was my first time meeting someone from a dating app. When Tim walked in, I recognized him right away from his pictures. He was average height, neatly dressed, and his smile seemed genuine. Everything looked normal, and that really put me at ease. We exchanged pleasantries. We ordered our drinks before settling into one of the corner booths. The conversation flowed easily at first. We talked about work, hobbies, and our favorite places in the city. He seemed really interested in my job, asking thoughtful questions about it. It was nice to feel like someone was genuinely listening. And as we sipped on our coffees, I started to relax, thinking that this might actually turn into something. But if that was the case, then I wouldn't be posting on here, right? Well, something shifted. Tim's tone became more intense as he started talking about his future plans. At first, it was the usual stuff, like wanting to travel, maybe buy a house, but then he started sharing things that felt oddly specific, a bit too much for a first date really. He began outlining a detailed plan for his life, and not just in terms of career goals or travel destinations. He was talking about his ideal number of kids and the exact age he wanted to achieve certain milestones. It was like he had his life planned out to the minute. I could have dismissed it as someone who just knew what they wanted, but the way he spoke about it was very unsettling. It was as if he was narrating a script with no room for deviation. The more he talked, the more uncomfortable I felt. He wasn't just sharing dreams, he was laying out expectations. It felt like I was being slotted into a role that I hadn't auditioned for. I tried to steer the conversation back to safer ground, asking about his hobbies and interests again, hoping to bring back the light-hearted exchange that we had earlier. But Tim didn't seem interested in that anymore. Instead, he started talking about his past relationships in a way that made me very uneasy. He was oddly detached, listing out reasons they didn't work as if he was analyzing a failed project. His tone had shifted from friendly to something more clinical, almost like he was ticking off boxes. It was then that I realized Tim wasn't really seeing me as a person. I felt like I was being assessed, measured against his checklist for a perfect partner. Suddenly, everything felt heavy. The air, the conversation, even my cup of coffee seemed burdensome. I glanced around the cafe, trying to find some distraction to break the tension. But it was no use. The pleasant chatter of other patrons faded to the background, leaving just Tim's voice and his unsettling plans. I could feel the discomfort gnawing in my stomach. I'd never experienced anything like this before, and I didn't know how to handle it. As he continued, I noticed he didn't seem aware of how off-putting his words were. He kept going, like he was completely oblivious to my growing unease. It felt as though I'd been drawn into someone else's life plan without my consent, and I needed to find a way out. I began to think of excuses to leave early. Maybe I could say that I had to meet a friend, or that something came up. But as I opened my mouth to speak, he paused, finally noticing my discomfort. There was an awkward silence as he waited for me to respond. And trying to stay polite, I mentioned needing to check on something in my car, hoping to create an opportunity to leave. I gathered my things, and as I stood up, Tim seemed to realize that things hadn't gone well. His face fell slightly, and I felt a twinge of guilt for leaving so abruptly. But I just needed to get out of there. Once I was outside, I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air on my face. It was refreshing after that overwhelming tension inside. I walked to my car, trying to shake off the encounter. The whole experience had been unsettling, and I needed time to process it. Driving home, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I just misread the situation or if I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew my instincts were right. There was something about the way Tim spoke, his detailed expectations, and his detached tone that didn't sit well with me. When I got home, I decided to take a break from the app, at least for a little while. I needed to reset, to remember why I'd started looking in the first place. It was about connecting, finding someone who shared my interest and my values, and not fitting into a predetermined role. I haven't given up on dating entirely, but I am more cautious now. I take things slower, allowing time to really get to know someone before meeting face to face. It's about finding balance between being open to new experiences and also protecting my own well-being. Looking back, I'm grateful for the encounter with Tim, strange as it was. It taught me to be more discerning, to listen to my gut feelings, and to prioritize my own comfort and safety in any situation. That's a valuable lesson that I carry with me as I continue my journey in the sometimes bewildering world of online dating. This isn't something that I would normally post, and I hope that I don't regret it somehow. I saw someone briefly mention this subreddit in a YouTube video, and I thought that it would be the perfect place to share the story of a horrific thing that happened to me, a story that I have never told anyone. I'm not sure if anyone will see this, but I'm sharing in hopes that it will inspire someone to stay safe, safer than I was. I'm not sure if trigger warnings are needed or suggested here, but it's just out of consideration of others. I'd like to warn everyone that I will be briefly mentioning sexual assault, with as little details as possible. 1 year ago around this time, I was bored and I was scrolling on the web, which was nothing unusual for me, when I decided to go on Omegle. Omegle was a website that allowed you to talk to strangers via video or text chat. It was around for a long time, and I used it frequently when I was younger as a time waster. There were plenty of creeps on there, sure, but I've had an equal amount of pleasant interactions and conversations on the site too. On the site, you could type in tags. Basically, they are keywords that describe the type of conversation or person that you are looking for, and then you would match someone with the same ones. I always use alt for alternative. I feel like it weeded out a lot of rude people and then connected me to more people my age. For reference, I was 19 at that time. I connected with someone who called himself Cain, and then we started chatting via text. He said that he was 23 and I said my age back. We exchanged some small talk, and before I knew it, we were talking all night. And I mean all night. We lived in the same time zone, and I had stayed up until 6 a.m. chatting about philosophy and life and our interest just because he was so entertaining and I was having fun. When we were talking about our general areas that we live in, he said abruptly, "Hey, we should meet up sometime." I laughed, but it turns out that he was serious, and it turned out that we only lived 3 to 4 hours away from each other, so he was really considering this. I am an anxiety-ridden person, but for whatever reason, I thought that he might be normal due to the fact that I just spent hours and hours talking to him and I didn't pick up on any red flags. So I said, sure, why the hell not, right? I know. This is an incredibly stupid mistake. I have a big heart though, and frequently make the mistake of giving others the benefit of the doubt. So, just like that, we started planning a camping trip. He was set on doing it just days after that morning because that was when he was off work next. I agreed because I didn't have anything to do at that time. I asked for his number so we could talk somewhere else about the trip other than Omegle. He gave it to me, I texted it, and I noticed the messages showed green on my iPhone. This indicated that he was using a Samsung or an Android. Teasingly, I said something along the lines of, "What's up with the Samsung?" And after a few minutes, he texted back saying that he had 2 phones and that one was for work. That was the first red flag that went off in my head. Why would you need 2 phones for work at this age? I mean, of course, there's possible reasons, but it just set off that intuitive feeling, one that I regret not listening to. I asked what his job was, and he said that he worked for the state. He added that he isn't allowed to share details about his job because he signed papers saying that he wouldn't, and that he could get fired if he were to violate this agreement. I was still wary of this, but I just figured that he worked for a police station or the town council or something that does with law enforcement, and that I was probably overthinking things. Days passed, and the date for our camping trip approached quickly. He wanted to take me someplace close to where he lives, Nimham Mountain in New York. Don't worry, this isn't near my house at all, and I don't give a fuck about violating his fake privacy after what he took from me. Obviously, I wanted to do at least a little research about where I was going, so I popped the name into Google. A bunch of results popped up about the soil on Nimham Mountain being contaminated with arsenic due to the old mines in the area. All of the government and state articles that I read said that it was still safe to hike there and that you should wash your skin and shoes after hiking. But I still had a feeling of unease about the whole thing. I texted Cain and I asked him why we were going to some place that could potentially be dangerous. He assured me that nothing would happen and said that he chose the spot because it's somewhere him and his friends frequently camp. This slightly reassured me. He does know the area better than me after all. My parents are definitely over-suspicious of everyone. Strict is also a safe word. But for good reason though, they are just protective. I told them that I was meeting up with a friend that I met over a video game and that I already know him for a month. I knew this would be less likely to freak them out than the truth, They were adamant that this was a horrible idea, but finally let me go off when Cain pulled into my driveway. He didn't come inside and waited outside of his car for me. After a brief introduction, my mom rushed out to meet him and ask a few questions about the area that we were headed to. And then we were off. We pulled into the Starbucks by my house so he could get a coffee, since he was tired from the drive up. We sat in his car for about an hour and a half afterwards. During that time, he asked me to rate the playlist he put on and showed me how he writes down every single song that he likes in a little notebook that he kept in his car. I thought that it was weird but kind of sweet. Like, what guy these days writes down songs, right? After an hour or so passed, I told him that we should get going so we can get to the campsite before dark. He kept saying just 5 more minutes, and after about 30 minutes of insisting that we need to leave to make it on time, he finally let us start onto the road. While we drove for the 4 hours up to our destination, Cain mostly talked about himself. He told me long stories about his friends and a girl that he used to date that he doesn't like. I thought that this was strange. Who talks about another woman to a girl like this? After telling stories for about 2 hours, I tried to deviate to a brighter topic and ask what kinds of things he's into hobby-wise. I already knew the stuff he told me online, but I was trying not to suffer from awkward silence or any more of his weird ramblings. He said that he thinks that eating healthy is important and that people who eat junk food are stupid. He also says that he only wears sustainable clothing that's made from cotton or wool. I don't have a problem with being sustainable, but he was saying it in a really obnoxious way. He turned to me and asked the first question about me since we got in the car. "So, what brought you to Omegle?" I told him that I was bored and that I liked meeting new and interesting people, and that was about it. He nodded slowly in thought and grinned, showing the most expression that I've seen on his face so far. He said that he likes to go on there and tell people that he's a soldier in Russia and that he was torturing people as he spoke to them. I just sat there in silence and kind of just stared at him, waiting for him to say that he was just kidding and that it was just some fucked up sense of humor. But he didn't. He just laughed and said, "What?" As we neared the campsite, I mentioned that I was getting kind of hungry. He said that we can stop at Whole Foods before going to camp for the night. In my head, I sighed about this, knowing he was probably going to judge me for whatever I picked out there. But it wasn't a problem for me. I was hungry and so I agreed. In Whole Foods, he made me pay for both our meals because his card wouldn't work there. He didn't even try, and this annoyed me, but I was just eager to get to camp, so I paid and we sat down outside to eat. After about an hour, we were finally ready to get to camp. We drive up the mountain, and he pulls into a small parking area with about 3 spots. Cars were parked there, and older men were surrounding the cars smoking weed. Nothing they were doing was wrong, at least morally to me, but it just made me uncomfortable that they were also there so late at night. Before I could even mention it, Cain says that it's too cold for him to carry our supplies to the campsite, which was about a 10-minute walk, and then to set up camp. I was taken aback by this. I said, "What do you mean? I'll help you. We didn't come up here for nothing." He insisted and told me to get out of the car to feel how cold it was. He said that it would take a while to pitch our tent and that it was too much for us. There was no way that I was getting out of the car and facing the men in the parking spot next to us. I rolled down the window halfway and I stuck my hand out. It was freezing. He was right about that. And that night, it was in the 30s and the wind chill felt worse being higher up. I was annoyed that I agreed sleeping in his car for the night. I was just sad that our trip was basically wasted. He sat in silence for a while, seemingly uncomfortable that I was annoyed and unsure how to comfort me. I slinked back into the passenger seat and I started to scroll on social media, trying to pass the time. He grabbed my phone out of my hand and said, "Come here." He patted his lap. I was already annoyed at the situation and confused on what he thought he was doing. I said, "You're funny." And then I reached for my phone that he had tossed onto the floor of the car. But before I could get to it, he reached over and scooped me up out of the seat and then tossed me onto the back seats. He then proceeded to rape me. I don't remember most of it. My eyes were squeezed shut and I was praying for it to end. And after he was done, he pushed me back into the seats and got dressed. He smiled at me and said, "So, how was it?" I just stared back at him with tears in my eyes. He climbed back into the front seat, propped his feet up onto the wheel, and then went to sleep. I didn't know what to do. I sat there motionless in the back seat for about 2 hours trying to process what just happened to me. I considered calling my mom, calling 911. I thought about it for what felt like forever. I already had been assaulted once in my life, and it broke my parents' hearts. I knew that learning of this would absolutely destroy them. I was also afraid what would happen if I told them. I didn't want my dad or my brother to go to jail for life because they were angry and got revenge against this guy. So I just sat there all night, watching the men outside stare into the car and smoke on their joints. I don't remember falling asleep, but eventually I woke up to wind hitting the car. I was in a fetal position, sitting upright, holding my legs with my arms. Cain noticed that I was awake and said that it's time to go. I was so scared of him. It felt like my heart was leaping out of my throat. Adrenaline was pumping through my body, and I started scanning the back seat and our overnight bags for something that I could use as a weapon in case he were to pursue me again. I ended up holding onto my full metal water bottle. It wasn't deadly by any means, but it could knock someone out, and holding it made me feel safer. I stayed in the back and Cain started driving. I asked where we were going and he said that we were going to get breakfast, almost as if that was obvious, and it was silly of me to ask. After driving down the mountain back into the city, we pull into a parking garage, and then he tells me to get out and that we're here. I get out of the car, and I cling close to it, not wanting to let him get behind me. I was thinking about making a run for it, but I didn't want to risk getting chased and overpowered by him. I followed him to a little Mexican spot on the corner, and he told me to order pancakes so that he could have some. This obviously made me more pissed than I already was, but I didn't say anything because I was afraid that there would be consequences if I showed negative emotions at this point. I ate a few bites of my food, and then he happily ate the rest of my plate. He paid quickly with cash and then took me back to the car, where he laid down in the back seat. He said he was going to take a nap because he didn't sleep well last night. I didn't want to argue with him, so I let him sleep. How could he sleep so soundly after what he did to me? He slept for about 3 hours. The whole time I was watching videos, trying to calm myself down and keep a clear head. It was about 9 a.m. and around this time my mom was waking up and texting me, saying that she wants me to be home. I told her that Cain was taking a nap and that I would be home soon. She didn't like the sound of that and insisted that I come home. I was happy to have a reason to get the fuck out of there, one that might be convincing to Cain. I woke him up and he became angry with me, saying, "Don't wake me up next time. Play on your phone or watch TikTok or something." I was shaking. but I managed to say that my mom wanted me home and that we needed to go. He said to let him sleep for 30 more minutes and told me to set a timer on my phone, and I did. 30 minutes felt like 30 hours, and once it went off, I woke him once again. This time, I filmed myself waking him up because I was afraid of what was going to happen. He was angry once again, and I told him that 30 minutes was up. I asked to leave, begged him to leave, and he said no, over and over, and he said that we aren't leaving yet. I was shaking uncontrollably. I put on a brave face and I pretended like I was being playful. I said, "Okay, I'll just get an Uber then." I turned around and started to open the car door when I felt his hand grab my shoulder and then dig into it, yanking me back into place. I honestly think that I blacked out from fear for a few seconds. He said, "What the fuck are you doing?" His hand was still on my shoulder, his fingers squeezing into my skin. My mind was racing and I was on the verge of tears. This caught his eye, and I quickly played it off by saying that my mom would call the police to come get me if I wasn't home soon. I had mentioned earlier that my dad works in law enforcement, so this was a little bit more believable of a lie. At the mention of police, something changed in his face. He looked frantic. He let go of me and unhappily agreed to drive me home. I felt a deep relief, the deepest relief that I have ever felt, and swallowed the lump in my throat as he climbed into the front seat and started our 5-hour drive back to my house. The drive back was much quieter than the drive up. I didn't say anything unless he initiated. I just gripped my phone in my hand and I tried not to make eye contact with him. I wondered if he had any remorse for what he did in those moments. When we reached the town where I live, it was 11:30 at night. Cain pulled onto the main strip to get to my house, and I saw flashing lights behind me. My first instinct was to be scared shitless because my dad is a cop, so I've always made extra sure not to break any traffic laws. The police pulled us over and 2 men stepped out of the cop car, and I frantically rolled down my window so they could see my familiar face, the daughter of their boss. One of them greeted me and looked both concerned and disappointed that I was in the car with someone getting pulled over. The other cop told Cain to get out of the car while I explained what we were doing out so late. I spared the illegal and horrific details. I was tired and scared, and I needed to be safe in my own home. I also didn't want them waking up my sleeping dad with such bad news. I overheard the second officer ask Cain about his info when he said, "What's your name, son?" Cain mumbled, and he said to speak up. The name he gave was not Cain, and he told the officer that he was 22 and not 23. My heart sunk into my feet, and I sat motionless while they explained to Cain that he missed the stop sign and that they are letting him off with a warning. They told me to get home, and I nodded my head. When we pulled off, I let my emotions take over and started screaming at the stranger that I was sitting next to. "Why did you lie to me? What the fuck is wrong with you?" He looked distressed from the volume of my yelling and told me to calm down and that he's sorry he lied. He said that he only lied for his identity for his own safety. That honestly baffled me considering that he just assaulted me. I screamed at him all the way to my house, and as we pulled in, I threw the car doors open and I started throwing my stuff out onto the lawn, desperate to just get far away from him. He tried to talk to me, to offer more pitiful excuses for his disgusting actions, but I screamed at him to get the fuck away from me and that I never wanted to see him again. I gathered my stuff off the lawn and I hauled it into my room while my parents slept soundly, unaware of the terrible secret that I had. I woke up my mom and told her that I was home, as she requested. And once I got to my room, I broke down. What happened to me started to sink in. As I was sobbing silently into my blanket, My phone lit up from a text from him. It read, "I'm sorry about what happened. I really am. If it makes you feel any better, I just got pulled over, so that's my karma, I guess. Let me know if you want to talk." I felt a wave of nausea hit me like a train. I screenshotted the message, blocked his number, and deleted his contact. And I haven't heard from him since. And I haven't hung out with anyone else besides my boyfriend. I still think about what happened almost every day, and I still feel sick when someone I don't know gets close to me, even if it's just a stranger passing by in the grocery store. I know that what happened was the product of my own irrational teenage actions. I know that I shouldn't have met up with someone that I didn't know, but I had faith that he would be a normal person, somewhat at least. I wish I would have listened to my instinct and to my parents' warnings. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't make up that police story, and I don't even want to think about it. I will never meet up with someone that I don't know again. While trying to cope with what happened to me, I googled Nimha Mountain again. I found a link that said, Cain Mountain North Trail Loop, New York. If you made it this far, or you take anything away from this story, please let it be this. Trust your instinct. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't meet up with strangers, no matter how good they look or how normal they seem. This was a lengthy story, and I apologize for that. It was hard for me to share after all of this time, after carrying the secret for so long. I am doing this in hope that it inspires someone out there to follow my advice and help keep themselves safe. What happened to me was disgusting and horrible, and I never wanted to happen to anyone else again. And that being said, Cain, let's not meet again. Fuck you, and I hope you're rotting in jail or hell right now. Edit. I'd like to assure everyone that yes, I am getting help to cope with what happened. I go to EMDR therapy weekly, and my doctors, therapists, and psychiatrists all know about the event. I am not interested in sharing my story with my parents or friends, as it would just cause me more pain. I am doing well now, and I will continue to get support. I never heard from Cain after that night that I got home, thankfully. He has been pulled over multiple times that I know of, so his name is already in the police database. I pushed myself to share this story in hopes of spreading awareness about online safety and trusting your instinct. I give everyone permission to share my story. Share it with your little sisters, cousins, nieces, and every young woman in your life who might make the same mistakes that I did. Hi, I'm Reina. I'm female and I'm 25. Online dating, it was one of those things that I thought about, laughed off, and then forgot about it. But one day, I don't know why, I just decided to set up a profile, browse through the sea of faces, and eventually match with a guy named Greg. He seemed alright, friendly, decent looking, with a job that he seemed to enjoy. And after a few days of chatting, we agreed to meet up for a drink. We chose a pub that was smack in the middle of the city, a bustling place where it felt safe, surrounded by other people. We exchanged pleasantries, and it all seemed to be going well. We talked about work, hobbies, and the typical stuff that you cover on a first date. He was polite, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. But a few days later, something odd happened. I received a message on social media from a profile that I didn't recognize. The message was brief, just a few words saying, "Be careful with Greg. He's not who he seems." At first, I shrugged it off. Internet trolls are everywhere, right? Plus, I didn't even know this person, and it could easily have been a random warning sent without any real basis. Ignoring the message, I went on with my routine. Greg and I continued to chat online and even planned another meetup. But then, more messages came, each from different accounts, all saying similar things. They were vague warnings, hints that Greg had a past that I should be wary of. It was unsettling because these weren't just spam messages. They seemed targeted, deliberate. I decided to pay them no mind though. Greg hadn't done anything to raise any red flags. Yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was not quite right. I resolved to do a little digging just to ease my own mind. A quick search didn't really reveal that much. Just his usual social media profiles and some standard information. There was nothing alarming, but the messages kept coming, each one poking at my growing unease. A week passed, and I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, or worse, manipulated. Every time that my phone buzzed with a notification, my heart would race, expecting another anonymous warning. It was as if someone was trying to drive a wedge between us before anything really had the chance to start. I began to wonder if maybe Greg had an angry ex who had taken it upon themselves to intervene. But without proof, it was all just a speculation. When we met again, I was on edge, trying to act normal while the messages lingered in my mind. Greg didn't seem aware of anything amiss. He was just as friendly and engaging as before, making it hard to reconcile the warnings with the person in front of me. Part of me wanted to confront him, to ask if he knew anything about what was happening. But I didn't. I didn't want to come off as paranoid or accusing based on the words of strangers. In the days that followed, I started noticing small strange things. A car seemed to appear on my street more often, parked just a bit too long to be coincidental. My social media accounts were getting unusual login attempts, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was keeping tabs on me. I changed my passwords, double-checked my privacy settings, but the feeling of being watched persisted. I decided to take a step back from online dating altogether, at least until I could figure out what was happening. I told Greg that I needed some time and space, using work as an excuse. He seemed understanding, which only added to my confusion. If he was involved in any way, he was doing a great job of hiding it. Eventually, the messages stopped, and with them, the strange occurrences. It was as if someone had flipped a switch and then decided to leave me alone. I never found out who was behind it or what their true intention was, but the experience left me more aware, more cautious about who I meet and how I share my life online. Looking back, I wonder if there was any truth to those warnings, or if it was just someone with too much time on their hands. So for now, I'm taking a break from online dating. I had been working at my job for about 7 years when I met Jeno. He was super quiet and didn't ever talk. He was about 6 foot tall and probably 150 to 175 pounds. He was always tan with a bowl-shaped haircut. He kept to himself at breaks, but was one of the best selectors that I have ever had. He never made a mistake and was friendly when I did speak with him. Throughout his first year, we slowly began speaking more and more and had become friends. He was always listening to country music as he worked, and it drove me nuts. We worked in a dry food warehouse. Sometimes, if I was a few aisles over and I could hear his country playing, I'd yell, "Turn that shit off!" to which he would yell back, "Huh, fuck you." It was all in good fun. As we became better friends, he would tell me stories at the bar after work about sneaking into his girlfriend's house and having sex with her. He was 21 and this girl was quite a bit younger, maybe 16 or 17. I thought that it was a little strange, but he was a little strange anyway. To be totally honest, I don't think he was all there. He had trouble pronouncing certain words that were quite common and couldn't add or subtract very well and seemed maybe a little slow. Maybe he just had a learning disability. Jeno started coming over to my place after work, and he would get online and play Gears of War for hours while drinking some beers. He would come to shows to watch the band I was in play. We did normal shit guys in their 20s do. And after a couple of years hanging out and getting to know each other better, I finally met his girlfriend, Tabitha. She was cute and definitely smitten with him, although she didn't talk much. Well, at least while he was around. She spoke to my wife in the kitchen while him and I played some Gears. Jeno let me know that Tabby, as he called her, was pregnant. I was shocked, but he seemed happy about it, and she was as well. At this point, they have been together for quite some time now. Fast forward to 2012. I had my first child in 2010, and Jeno's child was probably about 4 at this time. Clayton was his name, and he reminded me a lot of Jeno. They'd stop by to hang out and have a few beers while the kids played. He hasn't told me that he and Tabby were having trouble or even fighting that night. He just seemed like his usual goofy self, and we sat on the front porch watching the kids play. He left my house at around 9 p.m. and I was going to go to bed myself. Sometime later that night, the phone rang, and it was a girl that I was with before my wife. She knew Jeno and asked me what I thought about what had happened. I had no idea what she was talking about until she said, "He killed Tabby and he took off out of state with his kid." I couldn't believe it. No way Jeno killed anyone. This guy was the nicest dude in the world. We had never had an argument in the years that I'd known him, and I had never seen him even get mad. The guy didn't have much of a backbone, or that's what I thought. Apparently, when he got home, Tabitha and him got into a fight. He punched her in the throat and then damaged her windpipe, and then she died. He then took her body out to her car, drove it out into the country, and then put her in the driver's seat, and then set the car on fire. He then ran the car off the road. He ran home losing one of his shoes on the way back, picked up his son who was presumably asleep, and then fled to Kentucky. He was apprehended in a day or two. He will be out in 5 years, although they are petitioning to keep him locked up. I never thought that I would be the type of person to try online dating. It always seemed a bit too modern for me. But after seeing a bunch of my friends doing it, and some even getting as far as being engaged, I figured, why not give it a shot? Plus, I was tired of sitting around on weekends, binge-watching series alone. So, I downloaded this popular app and I started scrolling through profiles. A few weeks in, I matched with a guy named Mark. He seemed nice from his profile, an ordinary guy in a good way. He wasn't trying too hard to impress. He was just a regular guy with a job in tech and some hobbies that matched mine. We started messaging back and forth, and pretty quickly, we decided to meet up. We chose a cafe downtown that I'd been to a few times before. It was cozy, with that hipster vibe, brick walls, lots of plants, and good coffee. I put on my best casual clothes, and when I arrived, I was nervous, but seeing Mark put me at ease. He looked just like his photos, which was a relief because I had heard horror stories of people looking nothing like their online selves, like those catfishing stories. The date actually went well. We talked about a lot of things, since he was very easy to talk to, and it felt comfortable like catching up with an old friend. After we finished our drinks, we walked around a bit, checking out nearby shops. We then said our goodbyes and he suggested doing it again sometime. I agreed, thinking that it might be nice. A few days later, I was at the grocery store near my apartment, and I saw him again. He was in the produce aisle, examining the avocados. It felt a bit awkward at first, seeing someone from a date in your everyday life, but we ended up chatting for a bit, and he made a joke about our next date happening right there in the aisles. I just laughed it off, thinking that it was just a funny coincidence. The next weekend, I headed to my favorite park for a morning jog. It was one of those perfect crisp mornings with blue skies and just chilly enough to need a light jacket. But as I rounded a corner, there he was again, sitting on a bench, scrolling through his phone. I stopped, a little surprised. He then looked up and then we exchanged smiles. He mentioned being there to clear his head and enjoy the weather. We talked a bit about our plans for the day before I continued my run. And by now, I was starting to wonder if these encounters were just chance or something more deliberate. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself that we just happened to live in the same area and that it was bound to happen, you know? But as the weeks went by, I kept running into him at my favorite lunch spot, the local bookstore, even at the gym. It was like he was always there, just a few steps ahead or behind me. I started to feel a bit uneasy about all of it. The city isn't that small, and while I'm sure some overlap in hangout spots is normal, this was getting a bit too close for comfort. I talked to a couple of friends about it, and they suggested that maybe he was just into the same things, hence the frequent run-ins. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about it. One night, I decided to do a little experiment. I chose a different route home from work, something that I have never done before. It added an extra 10 minutes to my commute, but I wanted to see if anything changed. As I neared the intersection by my apartment, I spotted him again. Just as I turned the corner, he was on the opposite side of the street, seemingly on a walk, when we caught each other's eyes and he waved, but this time, I did not stop to chat. I started to wonder how he knew where I would be. Was it all a strange coincidence, or was he somehow tracking me? I thought about all the information that I shared online, check-ins, Instagram stories, photos tagged with locations, and it was possible that he was piecing together my routine from those. Feeling uneasy, I decided not to respond to his text for a while, hoping that distance might help. I also tightened my social media settings, making things more private, and stopped posting about my daily activities. For a couple of weeks, the sighting stopped, and I began to relax, thinking maybe it really had been a fluke. But just as I was beginning to feel safe again, I noticed a familiar face at my usual Sunday morning brunch spot. I didn't approach him, pretending to be engrossed in my phone. It was clear now that our encounters weren't random. He was showing up too consistently in places that I frequently visited. The realization hit me hard. I knew that I had to be more proactive about my safety. I started varying my routine, choosing different times and places to do things. I even changed gyms, and I found a new park across town for my runs. It was very inconvenient, but it felt necessary for my peace of mind. Eventually, the encounter stopped altogether. I don't know whether he realized that I caught on or if he just lost interest. Either way, I was relieved. I learned a valuable lesson about being cautious with information online and trusting my gut when something doesn't feel right. So, that's what happened. It wasn't dramatic or scary in the traditional sense, but it was enough to remind me to stay vigilant and trust my instincts. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, listen to your gut. It might just be telling you something important. Let me tell you about this one time that I met someone through online dating. It's a tale that taught me so much about expectations and reality. I met Julie on an online dating website. Her profile picture stood out. She looked incredible. She was captivating with her bright and joyful smile, and she had an aura that seemed to shine even through the screen. Naturally, I was intrigued. We started chatting, and I discovered that she was witty and charming. We had a lot of back and forth banter, and the conversations flowed smoothly, as if we had known each other forever. One day, she mentioned that she was unbeatable at Scrabble, a game that I fancied myself quite good at. That piqued my interest even more. And after a couple of weeks of chatting online, Julie and I decided to meet. I was excited but a little bit nervous. Would the chemistry we had online translate to real life? I don't know, but I was excited for it. On the day that we agreed to meet, I drove over to her place. It was a trailer park on the outskirts of town. I felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. As I knocked on her door, I took a deep breath, and Julie opened it. And I quickly realized that she looked quite different from her profile picture. She was much heavier than I had imagined. And she also looked unkempt, like she hasn't showered for days. My immediate reaction was surprise, which I tried to cover, reminding myself that everyone deserves kindness and respect. After all, looks aren't everything. Though I was a bit taken aback by the hygiene. Julie greeted me warmly, and I could tell that she was genuinely happy to see me. As I stepped inside, I noticed how cluttered the space was. There wasn't anywhere for me to sit comfortably, which made things a bit awkward right off the bat. The trailer was filled with books, papers, and a strange collection of knickknacks. It did seem cozy in a way, but also overwhelming, as if every corner had a story to tell. We tried to make small talk, but it felt different than our online chats. There was a slight tension, perhaps the result of the mismatch between our online personas and the reality. Eventually, I suggested that we play Scrabble, hoping that it would ease the awkwardness. She seemed genuinely excited about it, and we set up the game on a small coffee table. The first game started, and I was surprised by how competitive Julie was. She was good, no doubt about it, but I happened to win by a small margin. She was a gracious loser, laughing it off, and insisted that we do another round. And as we played, I noticed more about her concentration, her love for words, and the little quirks that made her unique. The second game was even more intense, but I managed to win again. I could see disappointment flicker in her eyes, even if she tried to hide it with a smile. And at that moment, I was actually feeling good about this meeting. Julie was nice and fun. If anything, I had found a new friend. I also felt bad for judging her at the beginning. We played a couple more rounds and had fun. When we were done, I gathered the tiles to put them away, and I sensed a shift in her mood. Julie became quiet, the air filled with an awkward silence. Feeling that it was time to leave, I thanked her for the games and then I stood up. But just as I reached the door, Julie started crying. And I mean, bawling. Tears were spilling down her cheeks, and then she was on her knees and she was begging me to stay longer, and then even suggested that we sleep together. That really caught me off guard. I gently declined, trying my best to be kind and understanding. I explained that I wasn't comfortable with that, and that it was important for us to feel safe and at ease and respected. But Julie didn't relent. Her tears continued, and she was bawling and screaming. I wish I could do something more to help her feel better, but I was feeling uncomfortable at this point. So I just opened the door, walked out, and closed it. As I left, driving back home, I couldn't help but think back about the whole experience. It was a roller coaster of emotions. When I got home, I checked my phone and I saw that there were a lot of messages from Julie. It ranged from getting angry to desperation to going back to being friendly and asking me for another game next time. I couldn't help but think that she was a bit unstable, and I don't think I'm the best person to handle people like that, so I just blocked her and then moved on. I genuinely believe that Julie is a nice woman, but that she needs some help in some way. And I also hope that she got the help that she needed. Back when I was single, I worked a night shift at a popular fast food place. It was one of those nights where everything was slow. I had finished all the closing tasks and I was just hanging around, waiting for the rare customer to wander in. To pass the time, I was swiping through Tinder on my phone from my spot in the drive-thru area. While swiping, I came across a profile of a girl who seemed pretty cute. Her name was Sarah. Her bio caught my attention because it started with a cheesy joke, and she mentioned how much she loved koalas, which I found a bit unusual. When we matched, I couldn't resist starting the conversation with, "Why koalas?" She replied with a laughing emoji saying, "Well, they're cute and a little dumb, like me." Her humor was right up my alley. We chatted back and forth on the app, nothing too deep, just some enjoyable small talk. Sarah asked me what I did for work, and I told her that I was a student during the day and I worked at that fast food place at night. There were so many around town that I didn't think twice about mentioning it. After we chatted for a while, Sarah had to go, but asked if we could meet up after my shift. I was pretty excited, but then I realized that I had been working in the back of a fast food joint all night, plus I had classes the next morning. I suggested Friday night instead since I had the day off. She agreed, and everything seemed set. A couple of hours later, as my shift was nearing its end, a car pulled into the drive-thru and I did my usual spiel. "Welcome, how can I help you?" The voice on the other end said, "Hi, I'm looking for Daniel." My heart skipped a beat. Why would someone be looking for me at work? I hesitated, but I responded, Okay, I'm Daniel. How can I help you?" The person replied with relief and then said, "Finally!" As the car pulled up, I was stunned. It was Sarah, the girl that I matched with on Tinder just a few hours ago. I gave her a smile completely confused and unsure of how to react. "Oh, hi, how are you?" I managed to say, trying to keep things light despite my surprise. "I'm good now. This is the fifth of this chain I've been to just to look for you," she said with a smile that was more unsettling than friendly. It was like she was thrilled to have finally tracked me down, and that made me uneasy. She then added, "So, do you want to go get drinks now?" I blinked, trying to process what was happening. I was still at work, clearly in my uniform, and she had been on a mini adventure around town just trying to find me. I looked at her, then down at my uniform, trying to convey with my eyes that this was not the time or place. Sarah's smile didn't waver as she stared at me expectantly, and after a few awkward moments, my manager, who had been watching from a distance, came over. He gently tapped my shoulder and then motioned for me to step aside. And I did. I was grateful for the intervention. He addressed Sarah, asking how he could assist her. She explained everything, repeating how she had been searching for me that evening. My manager, ever the professional, politely asked her to leave, reminding her that I was at work. But Sarah didn't take it well. She started yelling at him, causing a scene. And eventually, she drove off, leaving both of us stunned. After Sarah left, my manager told me he had seen how uncomfortable I looked from across the restaurant and felt that he needed to step in. I thanked him, admitting that Sarah's behavior was strange and a bit scary, and he agreed. After my shift ended, I checked Tinder to see if Sarah had left any messages. She hadn't, but I noticed that she had blocked me. I guess she got the hint. It was probably the weirdest thing that I have ever experienced from online dating, and thankfully, I didn't hear from her again. The next few days, I was on edge though. I was expecting her to show up unexpectedly and then cause a scene, but she didn't. Sometimes, I wonder about Sarah and what made her go to such lengths to find me. Was she just overly enthusiastic, or was there something more to it? I will probably never know. I'm choosing not to share personal details about myself here. Given the nature of this story, it's best if I remain anonymous. But I believe that it's important to share what happened as a warning, a reminder for other women to stay vigilant and protect themselves. But just for context, I'm a female. Growing up, my life was anything but a fairy tale. I was born into chaos, with parents who were more interested in their next fix than parenting. They were deeply entangled in drugs, consistently choosing substances over stability. My older brother, who I once hoped would be my protector, joined a gang and vanished into a world that glorified violence and crime. Home was not really a refuge for me. It was a place of danger and unpredictability. And from a young age, I have faced more than one assault. I wish I could say that I fought back, but at that time, I had neither the strength nor the resources to defend myself. I was a child, alone and scared, without friends or family to turn to for comfort and mostly for protection. My experiences left me wary of the world, instilling a fear that followed me into adulthood. But despite the grim reality of my upbringing, I was determined to escape that life. I found solace in books, losing myself in the stories where protagonists overcame adversity. I was so inspired by their lives. I know they weren't real, but I mean, who else would I look up to? I studied hard, pushing myself academically in hopes of creating a different future for me. My focus and determination paid off though, when I earned a scholarship to a university far from the chaos of my home. I had to go. I just had to. This was my one chance to make my future better. It wasn't easy. I had to balance work and school, and it was tough. But it became my new normal. I juggled classes during the day, and I worked in the evenings, sometimes pulling late-night shifts to make ends meet. It wasn't easy, but it was so much worth it for the promise of a better life. And slowly, I began to build a life for myself. Fast forward to now, and things have really improved. I'm not rich by any means, of course, but I can afford my rent, ensure that I have enough to eat 3 times a day, and I've even managed to budget for therapy, which has been crucial in processing my past and learning to trust again. And therapy has helped me a lot and helped me unpack years of my trauma. One thing that I did take away from my past, though, is the importance of self-protection. So I carry 2 cans of pepper spray in my bag at all times, one readily accessible, and another one tucked away just in case. I've also taken some self-defense classes, learning techniques to protect myself if the need arises. I've also become adept at assessing my surroundings, always aware of escape routes and potential dangers. With therapy's help and my own resilience, I gradually started feeling more confident in myself, and this newfound confidence led me to consider dating. I downloaded a dating app. I was cautiously optimistic, but I was fully aware of the risk. I do apologize for the long background. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood my part. Anyway, I was on the app, swiping through the profiles, and it became a sort of a game, a mix of hope and skepticism guiding my choices. I chatted with a few guys, but nothing and no one seemed to click to me. Well, that was until I started talking to Francis. His profile was intriguing, showcasing a mix of humor and intelligence that drew me in. He was tall, dark, and handsome, as the saying goes. But more importantly, he seemed genuine and polite. Our conversations were engaging, was filled with laughter and shared interest. And after a week of chatting, we decided to meet in person. I was excited but cautious, so I chose a public place for our first date. We settled on seeing a movie, a neutral setting where I felt relatively safe. I also insisted that we meet there separately. I didn't want to reveal where I lived just yet. Francis turned out to be as handsome as his photo suggested. In the theater, we exchanged polite smiles and then settled into our seats. But as the movie began, I noticed something odd. Francis wasn't watching the film. Instead, he was staring at me intensely. At first, I brushed it off, blushing even, thinking maybe he was just really interested in me. But as the movie continued, his gaze became more unsettling. It was as if he was studying me and not the movie. By the time the credits rolled, I had made up my mind. I wouldn't be seeing him again. There was no second date for this. But I wanted to end the date respectfully, so I agreed when he offered to walk me to my car. We had parked a bit further out since the lot was full earlier. It was late, the last showing of the night, and the parking lot was nearly empty. And as we walked, Francis asked if I wanted to come back to his place. I politely declined, mentioning that I had to be up early for work, which wasn't exactly a lie. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. His tone shifted from inviting to insistent, and then to pleading. Anxiety started to bubble up inside me. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I kept a firm grip on my bag, fingers wrapped around the can of pepper spray inside it. The night was still and unnervingly quiet, adding to the tension. Francis' demeanor changed abruptly, his voice rising with frustration as he demanded that I come home with him. Fear surged through me, a familiar yet unwelcome sensation. I quickened my pace, trying to keep the growing panic at bay, but before I could reach my car, he grabbed my arm, pulling me back with surprising force. The world narrowed down to that moment, the threat looming large in my mind. My survival instincts kicked in, and without hesitating, I raised the pepper spray and I unleashed it. Of course, the effect was immediate. Francis let go, screaming as the spray hit his face, and I saw him stumble down. I didn't want to see what happened next, so I slipped out of his grasp, rushed to my car, and locked the doors behind me. My heart was pounding, and my hands were shaking as I started the engine, adrenaline propelling me to safety. And once I was home, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I showered, trying to wash away the fear and tension. Then I changed into comfortable clothes. In the safety of my room, I blocked Francis on every platform, erasing our connection. I know some might wonder why I didn't call the police, and that is very understandable. But my history with them isn't really positive. Growing up, they failed me repeatedly. I learned the hard way that sometimes you have to help yourself because no one else will. Francis hasn't appeared in my life since that night, and I hope that it stays that way. Sharing the story is difficult, but if it serves as a warning to be cautious, then it's worth sharing. Trust your instincts and protect yourself. In this unpredictable world, being cautious and prepared can be your greatest defense. I had been chatting with a guy named Leo on a dating app called OkCupid. He seemed genuinely nice, with a quirky hipster vibe that I found appealing. He had the typical hipster look, big clear glasses, and a penchant for vintage clothing. He lived about 2 hours away from me, but we had been getting along well online, so he decided to drive down for a visit. I was open to it, curious to see where things might lead. When Leo arrived, though, he looked nothing like his photos. In his profile, he claimed to be 5'7" and thin. In reality, he was around 5'3", a bit pudgy, and his teeth were quite crooked. It was a little surprising, but I reminded myself not to be too shallow. I wanted to give him a fair chance, because everyone deserves that. Leo brought a bottle of wine with him. I'm not much of a drinker, but it was a nice gesture. We went out to lunch at a cozy cafe nearby, and the conversation flowed easily enough. He was charming and funny, and despite the initial shock of our mismatched expectations, I was okay with him. After lunch, we headed back to my apartment to hang out. I poured us each a glass of wine, and I just sipped mine. But Leo finished the whole bottle before 4 p.m. As the afternoon sun filtered through my windows, he suddenly leaned in, asking if we could make out. I hesitated, but I decided to give it a try. After all, chemistry can sometimes surprise you. However, it didn't work for me. We kissed for a minute, but I felt no spark. Gently, I pulled away, trying to handle it kindly. Leo seemed a bit disappointed, but we shifted back to chatting casually, hoping that the awkwardness would pass. As the afternoon wore on, Leo began complaining that he was tired and a little drunk. I told him that he could crash on my couch if he needed to rest before driving back. He then asked if he could sleep in my bed instead. I was taken aback by this, but I told him that it was fine and that I would take the couch. This didn't seem to sit well with him, and out of nowhere, Leo started raising his voice, clearly upset. He insisted that he wanted to sleep in my bed with me for him not to be alone. His emotions escalated quickly, and before I knew it, he was throwing a fit, yelling, and storming out of my apartment. I was shocked and I was worried. He seemed too drunk to drive, and I tried to convince him to stay, but he was determined to leave. As he slammed the door behind him, I felt a mix of concern and also relief. I hoped that he'd make it home safely, but I also knew that I couldn't continue any kind of relationship with this guy after this. Later, I found out Leo got home safely, but we didn't speak after that day, and I felt a bit unsettled about how the entire meeting had gone. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected message on the app. It was from Leo. He was apologizing for his behavior. He explained that he had been dealing with some personal issues, and he acknowledged that he had acted inappropriately. He didn't ask for a second chance, just wanted to express his regret. His message gave me some sort of closure. I thanked him for reaching out, and I wished him the best. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and I went through a rough patch with dating not too long ago. Things were pretty terrible after breaking up with my fiancée. I found out that she had been cheating on me for the last 6 months of our relationship, which really crushed me. So I was in no shape for anything serious after that. I just wanted to explore a bit, maybe make a friend or two. I decided to give online dating a shot. I made a profile and I matched with a few women that I found interesting and attractive. The experience was mixed. Some women seemed to like me, while others weren't as interested. That's just how it goes sometimes. But one woman, let's call her Lisa, seemed nice at first. She was a nurse and pretty busy, which was perfect for me given my own busy schedule as a lawyer. I wasn't looking for someone who might become too clingy. Lisa and I started messaging each other. We were exchanging pictures and even had a few phone calls. She had a really nice voice, which I liked. I never told Lisa where I worked, but she somehow figured it out. I work as a lawyer at a local law firm. One day, out of the blue, she showed up at my workplace. This was unexpected because we hadn't even gone on a date or met in person yet. Seeing her there wasn't a pleasant surprise. I went outside to talk to her, remaining polite even though I was uncomfortable. I asked her not to come to my workplace again, explaining that it was inappropriate. She agreed that it probably wasn't the best idea, and everything seemed all right. But her behavior had put me off, and I decided that I didn't want to continue communicating with her. And later that day, I messaged Lisa to tell her that I didn't want to talk anymore. In hindsight, maybe I should have just ghosted her, but I thought being upfront was better. I then removed her and I blocked her from my contacts. The next day, when I got to the office, the security guard came up to me. He mentioned that my friend was back again, waiting outside the company property. I turned to look, and there she was, just standing and staring. I told the security guard that I didn't want to see her, and I asked him to keep her away, and he agreed to handle it. I thought that would be the end of it. But I started noticing Lisa around more often. She seemed to hang out around the places that I frequented. At first, it was unsettling, but eventually, I managed to put her out of my mind. I started seeing someone new, a woman who genuinely made me smile. We hit it off well and decided to start dating. Things were going great between us. Then one day, my girlfriend called me. She sounded so upset. She asked if I was cheating on her, which took me by surprise. I assured her that I wasn't, and she said that someone named Lisa had messaged her on Facebook claiming that we were together. So I had to explain to my girlfriend about the whole situation. She believed me, and then she told Lisa to back off. But Lisa didn't stop there. She kept trying to contact my girlfriend, creating unnecessary stress. It took a few months of harassment before Lisa finally disappeared from our lives. I don't know why she stopped or how, and honestly, I don't care. I'm just relieved that she's out of the picture. The whole experience was a roller coaster. It's a story that I often share with friends to remind them how unpredictable and sometimes scary online dating can be. I had been trying out online dating for a while, just hoping to meet new people. It wasn't always easy, but occasionally I would find some interesting enough to meet in person. That's how I ended up planning a walk with Tom at my favorite park. We had been messaging for a couple of weeks and he seemed nice, maybe a bit quirky, but who isn't in their own way, right? The day was sunny and perfect for a walk, and I was looking forward to it, hoping for an enjoyable chat, even if there wasn't any romantic connection. Tom arrived right on time, and initially, he seemed really normal. We greeted each other, and I pushed aside the typical first meeting nerves. As we began walking, I noticed that Tom was more eccentric than expected. He had this intense look in his eyes, like he was always thinking about something deep. At first, we talked about the weather and the park, just small talk really. But then, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Tom started telling me that he had special abilities. He claimed that he was a psychic and had magical powers. I chuckled, thinking he was joking, but as he went on, it was clear that he was serious. He passionately talked about his supposed powers, like sensing things about people just by being near them. I nodded politely, but inside, I was feeling like maybe Tom was a bit too out there for me. The more he talked, the stranger his claims got. He talked about seeing auras and predicting events with such certainty that I wasn't sure how to react. I just let him talk while I try to steer the conversation back to normal topics. The park, usually my place to relax, felt different with Tom's odd stories. The sunlight through the trees and chirping birds seemed distant as I focused on the path ahead, wondering how much longer I'd have to pretend to be interested. And after about an hour, it was time to end the walk. I was ready to leave. But then Tom asked if I could give him a lift to the bus station. He didn't drive himself to the park, which surprised me, but I agreed, although feeling a bit uneasy about more time together. The drive was short, just 5 minutes, but it felt longer than that. We talked about random things, music, movies, and normal stuff while I drove him. I mean, where were these topics earlier? But then, Tom suddenly said that he needed a bathroom. The bus station was nearby, so I told him that we were almost there. As I pulled up to the station, Tom looked uncomfortable. But then out of nowhere, he wet his pants right there in the car. I was so shocked and disgusted, I didn't even know what to say. He mumbled an apology, grabbed his things, and then quickly got out. And once he was gone, I drove away. I was trying to process what just happened. Of course, I had my car cleaned. It's just that it was one of the weirdest experiences that I've had from online dating. When I told my friends later, They laughed at how bizarre it all was. But I also felt a bit of sympathy for Tom. Maybe he truly believed in his abilities. Or maybe he was just trying to be different in a world where everyone wants to stand out. When I first met Brad on an online dating app, everything seemed perfect. I had been single for a while and I was looking for companionship. Just someone to share my free time with, to laugh and explore life together. And Brad appeared to be that person. His profile was filled with interests that mirrored mine, from hiking to trying out new recipes in the kitchen. He was handsome too. He had an easy smile that showed in the photos, and our conversations flowed effortlessly, like we had known each other for years. We chatted for a few weeks before finally deciding to meet in person. When he suggested that we meet at a small cafe downtown, I felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. I remember that day clearly. The sun was shining, the streets were bustling with people going about their weekend routines, and I felt a sense of optimism that had been absent for some time. Brad was even more charming in person. He carried himself with a laid-back confidence. Our conversation over coffee was filled with laughter and shared stories about our lives. He told me that he was a freelance photographer, which explained his flexible schedule and his ability to travel often for work. I admired his adventurous spirit, feeling a tinge of envy for his freedom to chase sunsets and capture the world through his lens. Our first date was followed by many others, and we clicked in a way that made me feel like I had found someone so special. Brad was attentive, always texting good morning and staying up late into the night just to chat with me. He made me feel important, cherished even. And it wasn't long before we started spending most weekends together, just exploring the city and venturing into the countryside for scenic hikes. After a couple of months, Brad began hinting at wanting to take our relationship to the next level. He mentioned how much he loved spending time with me, how he felt more at home in my apartment than anywhere else. It was flattering, that level of affection and comfort. But then one day, after a long hike and a picnic by the lake, he dropped the bombshell. He wanted to move in with me. At first, I was taken aback. We had only been dating for a few months, and while things were going well, moving in felt like a big step. I liked my space. It was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind and recharge. But Brad was persuasive. He made it sound so romantic, the idea of waking up together every day, sharing meals, and building a life as partners. It was tempting, and in a moment of optimism, I agreed. He moved in quickly, almost too quickly, with just a couple of bags and his camera gear. I remember thinking that it was odd how little he brought with him. But he explained it away, saying that he liked to travel light and that his work didn't require much. At first, everything seemed to go well. It was nice to have him around, to share my space with someone who seemed to care genuinely about me. But soon, little things started to nag at me. Brad seemed to always be at home, claiming his freelance work allowed him to edit photos on his laptop all day. He rarely mentioned new photography jobs or clients, which struck me as strange given how passionate he had initially seemed about his career. When I asked about his work, he would brush it off, saying it was all under control and moving smoothly. As weeks turned into months, I started noticing other things. Brad avoided any conversations about his family or past, quickly changing the topic whenever I asked about it. He didn't seem to have many personal belongings or memorabilia, nothing to indicate a life that he lived before we met. And then, and there was his phone. It never rang, and messages were scarce, almost like he didn't want anyone to know where he was. My unease grew, but I pushed it aside, not wanting to ruin a good thing with my paranoia. After all, here was a man who seemed to adore me, who was attentive and caring. Maybe I was overthinking, letting my imagination run wild. But despite my attempts to rationalize, the feeling in my gut persisted. Things took a darker turn one evening when I returned home from work earlier than usual. As I walked through the door, I noticed Brad hurriedly closing his laptop, looking startled to see me. He forced a smile, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. My heart skipped a beat, and alarm bells were ringing softly in the back of my mind. Curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Brad than he was letting on. And that night, while he slept, I did something that I had never imagined doing to anyone that I had cared about. I checked his phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through his messages, finding nothing but a few exchanges with an unknown number discussing mundane things like meeting up and vague mention of financial troubles. So, there was nothing bad, I guess. But the following days were filled with tension. I pretended everything was fine, but inside, I was wrestling with growing doubts and a creeping sense of dread. I needed answers, some clarity about who Brad really was and what he was hiding. One afternoon, when Brad was out running errands, I decided to search the apartment. I felt guilty invading his privacy like this, but the need to know outweighed my hesitation. At first, I found nothing of note, just his clothes, camera gear, and a few toiletries. But tucked away at the back of the closet that I let him use, just behind a pile of winter coats, I found a shoebox. Inside were various IDs, each with Brad's photo but different names. My mind raced, piecing together a chilling realization. Brad wasn't who he said he was. Panic gripped me as I tried to process what this meant. I couldn't confront him, not yet. I needed more information, a plan to get out of this situation safely. My thoughts spiraled into worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. I needed to be careful and discreet, to protect myself until I figured out my next move. That night, I barely slept. I was awake as Brad slept soundly beside me, oblivious to the turmoil brewing within me. I needed to act, and quickly. I reached out to a friend who worked in law enforcement, sharing my concerns without revealing too much detail. They agreed to help, promising to look into Brad's background discreetly. Days passed in a blur of anxiety and pretense, and I had to carry on as if everything was normal. But inside, I was a mess of nerves and fear. My friend finally called with the news confirming what I had feared. Brad had a history of identity fraud, moving from place to place, latching onto people and situations where he could exploit their trust. Now, having this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. I needed to get Brad out of my life without provoking him. I carefully crafted a story about just needing my space back, hinting at personal issues that I needed to address. And to my surprise, Brad took the news without much protest. He packed up his things under the guise of moving on to new opportunities. It was such a relief to see him go, to reclaim my space and sense of security. In the weeks following Brad's departure, I was wary of everything and everyone. I changed my locks, updated my security system, and I took a break from online dating. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was to have discovered the truth before things escalated further. It's crazy how for a couple of months, I really didn't find any definitive proof. I should have just moved on, you know? But something was screaming from inside of me every single day that something was wrong. So, I guess our takeaway from this should be trust your gut. It won't betray you.
Hello, everyone. It's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared because your fear feeds me.